I can't make the smoke go away. I can't bring in a fan and blow it out the valley, although people suggest it all the time. I don't have a big enough fan to blow it away.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana College of Business. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Sarah Coefield is an air quality specialist with the Missoula City-County Health Department. Her wildfire smoke reports are mandatory reading for many of us here in Western Montana. Sarah is deeply passionate about air quality and how it affects people's lives. That passion, along with some famously dark humor and whimsy, make her writing unique and incredibly effective. I frequently tell students that it takes courage, talent, and clarity to use humor when communicating about serious topics. And you might not expect humor from a government employee like Sarah, but you'll find it at just the right moments with just the right tone. Beyond her writing, Sarah is a fierce advocate for the communities and people affected by wildfire smoke. In this conversation, we talk about her approach to communication, as well as her collaboration with Climate Smart Missoula to scrape together the funding required to get air cleaners to communities in need. It was great to learn more about Sarah and her work, and I'm excited for you to learn more about this exceptional Missoulian right now. Okay, so we're here today with Sarah Coefield. Sarah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you are air quality specialist for Missoula City-County Health Department. We'll get into all the amazing work you do, but first off, I just kind of want to get a little bio. So you're a native Montanan, right?
Correct. Yeah, I'm actually from Helena.
And I assume you got your interest in air quality somehow from your father's work. I would assume there's a connection there. He's a longtime meteorologist, right?
Yeah, there is a connection there. But when I was growing up, my father was the air quality meteorologist for the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. So, he's been in air quality forever. You would think that growing up with my father in air quality, that's why I would naturally follow his footsteps into air quality. He was the air quality meteorologist for the Department of Environmental Quality for 30 years. But I thought his job was really boring growing up. Like, you can't
Sure.
see the air. It's not exciting. I was much more interested in water. I interned for the DEQ in the water quality section
Okay.
for a couple of years as a college student. I wanted to work with animals. Like, his office was just maps and computers and just like, why? So no, I was not interested in his job at all. And then I went through college. I majored in biology and chemistry because science is
Okay.
cool.
And where did you study?
Uh,
Where'd you?
it was Whitworth College at the time. Now it's Whitworth University in Spokane,
Okay.
Washington. Then I went to
Fantastic.
graduate school in Michigan at Michigan
Mhm.
State, where I ended up completing a master's in toxicology with a wildlife toxicology emphasis, working with great horned owls on a contaminated floodplain. And then while I was there, I also got a master's in environmental journalism
Interesting.
because the way I saw, like, I was learning all this really cool stuff about science, but what's the point knowing all these really amazing things if we can't talk about it? So I added in the journalism degree, in part just because I really like being able to share cool things about science with other people, and I just have always been really interested in journalism as well.
Sure. So was that your kind of emerging intention in the moment, was to not go down the path of being an academic or a field scientist and being more of a science communicator?
Well, yes. One thing that I learned when I was deeply entrenched in academia was that I don't want to be entrenched in academia. I always thought that was where I was going to end up, because I was good at school. So I'm like, well, I'll stay in school forever,
Sure. Yep.
like go to graduate school, get a ton of fancy degrees, and be a researcher or something. And then once I started doing that, I found out that that's just not how my brain works.
Okay.
It's not my strength. I still really love learning everything, but the research aspect of it is something that I can be a really great cheerleader for, but not really a great expert in, I would say.
That makes
So
sense.
it's just a different mode of um, thinking, I think, that is required for a lot of really effective research. So I added the communication side and just really was excited to be able to translate science to everybody, because I think that the public, they're not dumb. Like, the public understands a lot of things. Like, we all have different backgrounds, we learn different things, and if you aren't entrenched in science, you might not have had the opportunity to learn the words to understand it. Like, I don't think there's any reason that the really cool things about science can't be explained in a way that is accessible for the public without speaking down to the public. So just that area of translation between the technical and what makes it so that it's understandable is really interesting to me, and was really a neat thing to get to kind of pursue in my graduate work. And then it's just kind of amazing to get to do that now. But how I ended up doing air quality after going to graduate school for wildlife toxicology and for environmental journalism was basically, I was finishing up school in 2010 and needed a job. And I really wanted to come back to Montana.
Sure.
I'd been in Michigan for 6 years, and it took me 4 years to start liking it. It's very flat. But the trees are really leafy and they're very pretty, and the lakes are great. I will give them, they're great lakes. Uh, but I need to get back to Montana, and this position at the health department here in Missoula had opened up, and my dad called me and he was like, "Hey, Sarah, you can do this." I'm like, "Okay, I need a job." Um, and he gave me a crash course in air quality, and I applied for the job, and I actually didn't get it. I interviewed and they hired someone else.
Okay.
So I spent that summer just kicking around in Swan Lake, Montana.
Not such a
Uh,
bad thing to be doing.
it was the best summer of my life. I worked in the little general store. I went hiking all the time. I read my book on the dock. It was glorious. And then that fall, I started frantically applying for jobs, and the health department called me and asked if I still wanted this one. I was like, I do. That would be great. So that's kind of how I got here. It was not everywhere I expected to end up. But once I got really engaged in it and learned more about air quality and got more and more interested in it, it's really become something I'm really passionate about. It's also side benefit. My dad and I have this great relationship now. We always had a good one, but now we have always have something to talk about, which
No
is
doubt about it. Yeah.
it's just really fun, and it's really great to have this added connection with my father, who is just a super awesome human being. It's been 10 years now that I've been doing this, and I think that one thing that I've found in almost everything I've ever done, with getting into air quality, and then just when I was in journalism school learning about that, is once you start studying something, it tends to get more and more and more interesting the more you do it. So it's pretty easy, I think, to get just really entranced with whatever your current project is. And so what I thought was super boring, because you can't see the air and you all have these maps and computers all over the place, turns out I like those maps and computers. And we can see the air. That's a bad sign. It means the air is bad. So it's where I think I needed to be, and I'm really happy with what I'm doing.
And so most folks, I think most listeners, probably their touch point to you and to your work is through your regular smoke reports. But tell us the sort of scope of your job. Like what is on your plate of responsibilities?
Yeah, so there are two of us in the air pollution control program in Missoula County. And we are pretty unique in that the county actually has an air program. Not many counties in Missoula have their own air programs. And we are essentially tasked with doing what we can to reduce air pollution in the county.
Okay.
And obviously, we can't regulate away lightning, but for all those things that we can have something to do with to try to minimize air pollution, then we have a set of rules that we enforce. So our program has a lot of different aspects to it. There's big regulatory component where we write rules and policies. We also have to do enforcement on those rules. They apply to things like outdoor burning and solid burning devices, so like wood stoves and fireplaces, road dust, whether we have a lot of rules about road dust inside the Missoula Air Stagnation Zone. We issue air pollution alerts and advisories during the winter months if we get a lot of particulate pollution buildup. Do a fair bit of education, either by going to schools or university classes or by speaking at conferences and workshops and webinars. We do some studies. Right now, we are kind of wrapping up the second year of a pretty substantial study that we did in partnership with EPA and the university, looking at indoor air quality during
Okay.
wildfire smoke events. And so there's a lot to it. There's policy and there's regulation and there's education and there's some work with wildfire smoke where we do intervention work. So I have a cast of portable air cleaners that I give out to daycares and preschools to help them create cleaner indoor air for their kids. And I do a lot of education work with Climate Smart Missoula, which is a nonprofit I work with a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and just through various speaking to different groups around town, around the county, the state, the country. I've been to Canada a few times, which was pretty cool.
Nice. They have air up there too, right?
Turns out air's generally everywhere, so there's always something to talk about. So yeah, it's multifaceted. So like right now I am still kind of wrapping up a little bit of wildfire season stuff. I'm preparing for outdoor burning season, where when we have outdoor burning, I'm the person who makes the decision on a daily basis of if it's a burn day or not.
Okay.
And that's based on dispersion conditions. How is the air going to move? Is the smoke likely to become stuck in the valleys? So like when we have a major burner like the Forest Service or the BLM or DNRC wants to light off a really big burn, they have to get clearance through our office before they can do that. So there's a lot of looking at how the atmosphere is going to be behaving that day, essentially, and what we expect the smoke to be doing to try to minimize the impacts of that burn on the populated areas. So I'm preparing for that because I know that I have a couple burn requests coming up at the end of the week. We have the oxygenated fuels program is still a thing. So there's contracts to do that with our contractor and sending out registration forms to all the facilities that are impacted. And then I'm also working on, we're doing a rule rewrite. So we have lots of public hearings for that kept getting delayed because of COVID. And now in preparation for a continuation of the public hearing, we need to write a lot of documents explaining why our rules may be more stringent than the state rules and justifying it all with peer-reviewed studies and whatnot. So there's kind of a lot of balls in the air at any one time.
Yeah, it totally sounds like that. And one of the things, a thread that sort of emerges throughout that is this communication and coordination. And you mentioned science communication in particular early on, and how you didn't quite say this, but one of the things I think perhaps limits a lot of scientists is the ability to sort of communicate their work clearly and compellingly to a broader audience. A lot of that comes down to the language and the words, as you describe. I mean, I think of jargon as sort of a mechanism to exclude people. And you have a sensibility with your communication, particularly about wildfire smoke and air quality, that is super accessible, draws people in. It makes them interested. It makes them kind of want to consume more of your writing and learn more about the topic. Can you talk about kind of your approach to just communication about a scientific topic in a way that's suitable for a general audience?
Yeah, I don't really feel that we need to talk down to the public, but I do think we need to explain ourselves.
Sure.
So when I'm discussing what's happening with wildfire smoke, for one thing, I think it's important for people who are reading my wildfire smoke blog to be able to tell that I'm another human being and I'm experiencing the same thing they are. I think I tend to include some sensory details of, to get across like how we're feeling, what we're smelling, what we're seeing. Like you experience wildfire smoke. Like it's not something that's just like in the distance. It is actively impacting everybody
Right.
who is in it. So acknowledging that experience is, I think, part of how I enter some wildfire smoke communication. But there's also a lot of there is technical stuff to wildfire smoke of how we expect it to move and how we can maybe project what's happening with the inversions that are when they're going to form and where the wind is coming from and what level in the atmosphere the winds are going. And there's definitely some technical terms involved in there. And so when I want to explain what is likely going to happen, I try to also kind of explain some of the terminology a little bit, just to help people have an entry into the technical side of things, to kind of invite them in. Because it's not, the concepts themselves aren't particularly challenging. Like air goes up and down and sideways, and you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of tell where it's going to go based on modeling and temperature gradients and whatnot. And so if you can just kind of explain like with regular words, like this is how the air is going to move, and then say this is how we would describe it, I think that folks catch on pretty quick. I remember several years ago, the first time I ever used like the upper level flow. I'm like, it's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but it's like it's the winds that are really high up, and like explain that's what that is. I think eventually the audience gets more and more aware of the terms and more comfortable with them as you use them and explain them. But I do think it's definitely possible to use regular everyday words to explain the more technical ones, and then you can maybe use the more technical ones going forward. They may be more accurate, but first you need to say, hey, an inversion just means that there's cold air rolling down the hill and settling on the ground, and it's called an inversion because usually cold air is going to be higher up the mountainside, so the temperatures are inverted. But it's one of those things that I think that it's really nice to include, because I think people deserve to know what's happening. Really, that's what it comes down to for me when you're talking about science communication is, I mean, not only is science really cool, but the public deserves to understand what is happening to them. Because, wildfire smoke is something that happens to people. And I don't like people to not know why it's happening or what's going on. I can't make the smoke go away. I can't bring in a fan and blow it out the valley, although people suggest it all the time. I don't have a big enough fan to blow it away. But if I can explain why it's happening and what we expect the future to look like, it can perhaps give some people a little bit of agency to make some decisions for themselves, to say, okay, this isn't a mystery. It sucks, but it's not a mystery anymore. And I don't know if that's a great comfort to people, but I feel like they deserve to have that information.
Yeah, and it draws people in. I like the use of that word agency and regular words, as you say, and you inject a bit of humor as well, somewhat regularly. And we when we teach writing, particularly technical forms of writing to students or more formal terms of writing, like using humor and tools like that. I often frame it in terms of this is a big risk, and it's sort of a breaking of the rules. But if you do it, you got to do it really, really, really well, and you do it really well. How do you kind of approach that sensibility,
Yeah.
and when to use it and when not to?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I started putting kind of dumb smoke jokes, I call them dumb smoke jokes, into my updates a long time ago, but I would only put them into the emails that went out to my email list in the press because I had gone to journalism school and I know how boring it is to read news releases. So I kind of liven them up in large part because I have a fondness for the reporters because I know what they're going through. And such is kind of like the origin of them. And they started going out to the general public via my blog in 2017 when my boss found out that the version she was reading in her email was not what anyone else was seeing. Because I had, been taught to put, kind of just the facts, straightforward
Yeah,
stuff
stick to
out
the
for
script.
public consumption, especially from government. And so my public facing material was all just very fact, 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 fact. And she was like, no, put in the jokes. I'm like, oh, okay. And I understand where she was coming from, and what it has created is something that people will actually read the whole thing, which is just, if you're doing communication or you're trying to get the public to really understand something and maybe have behavior change, you want them to read the whole thing. So part of the trying to make them interesting is to encourage people to read the whole thing, because there's hopefully something for them to look forward to in the post. But also, it really does get back to uh,
Mm-hmm.
so much of what I include in the writing. It's coming from a place of empathy and a little bit of dark humor, because I think that's how we cope with bad situations. A lot of us is some wry observations and dark humor. It delivers to us a sense of togetherness when we can just kind of acknowledge how ridiculously awful something is. Like, okay, yep, here we are, 2020, let's do it. So when I'm talking about what goes in updates, along with just liking to have some humor in there to get people to read the post, I want people to know that I'm in there with them. That comes across from the sensory details, as well as the kind of the dark humor and everything else. But I really do feel that a lot of how understanding when to throw something silly in and when not to does come down to empathy.
A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hey, this is Colter Nuanez from ESPN Missoula, and you're listening to A New Angle.
And you can't write like that unless you genuinely care about the people you're writing to. And there's a lot of division right now in our culture and in our
Mm-hmm.
society, and there's a lot of stress and worry. But we're all still people. We're all still living in the same environment together. We're all going through a lot of really weird, terrible things. And just genuinely caring about each other is such a huge mechanism for us to get through what's being thrown at us, if it's wildfire smoke or if it's COVID-19 or if it's any other things that comes at us. I really think that when we can really care about each other, we can go a lot farther. So I certainly couldn't write like I do if I didn't care about the people in my audience. And so I hate to say it comes down to instinct on some level, but there definitely is a level of instinct in how jokey I'm willing to get. And there's also the severity of the air quality will impact how jokey I get.
Yeah.
For example, when Sealy Lake was smoked out in 2017, it was the worst
Mm-hmm.
smoke we had ever seen. And I think it's still the worst smoke anyone has seen. I mean, there's been a lot of news about how bad the smoke in California, Oregon has gotten, but they still haven't had a month and a half of hazardous air quality. So, that was not something to joke about. Sealy Lake was horrific. And people were really suffering. And so that was more something to, try to convey the seriousness of it and
Sure.
not make light of it at all. But if we, if we're in Missoula and, like, oh, the mountains disappeared, whoops, got a bit smoky, that's a bit different than having that incredibly oppressive smoke that is like harming people actively
Yeah.
harming people. I'm not saying the smoke we have in Missoula has been less, that's been not harmful, because certainly we've had levels of smoke that will be harmful to people's health. Like, all smoke is bad for you, but it has been, levels that the general populace will still be able to function in generally. And it is something that you can kind of, see the end of. If we have a week of bad smoke, it's a week of bad smoke, but it's going to go away at the end of that week,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, and I think the key sort of construct in this thread is the empathy, and you earn that empathy and display that empathy in a variety of ways. I mean, an interview you gave about the 2017 Sealy smoke was something along the lines of, we don't have the right word or categories to describe what we're seeing. And so that kind of language, I mean, that's, like you said, that's simple words, but it's also just, that's a clear way of communicating to anyone that this is an extreme situation. And that certainly builds empathy.
Yeah, that was that was a really traumatic wildfire year. That was actually a
Yeah.
year that was occasionally really hard to find any jokes, because people were calling me asking for help, which was really hard. So it's definitely a place that, when we're going through a dark time, if we can just think about how we care about each other, I think that helps us find words to help to get people through it. And then, and on top of all of that, I have a silly sense of humor. And when I can throw some silliness in to lighten things up a little bit, I think that can be kind of valuable. But I think that in addition to like helping you find the correct time to include jokes or not include jokes, empathy helps you connect with your audience in a way that they feel cared for,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
and maybe helps them absorb the information a bit more. It comes down to, again, talking with your audience instead of to your audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I want so much for people to hear what I'm saying about, not only here's how the air is moving, here's what the smoke is going to be, but also what that means to them, and hopefully what steps they can then take to protect themselves from the smoke, and uh, understand that they do have some things that they can do. And if people don't read past just the first line that says what the current air quality is, they aren't going to get that extra information. And I want just for folks to be able to get all the information I'm trying to share. I don't give you bad information, but I give you lots of it. It's I like to joke, but it's long form writing. If you want to, I throw jokes in there to make it easier, but there's a lot of information.
Let's pivot to some. I mean, you mentioned there a few moments ago about people asking you for help, and outside of the wildfire smoke blog, you do a ton of work to help people improve the air quality in their homes, places of business, etc. Like, let's talk about some of the work you do to help people get air purifiers, for example, and create cleaner air for them to breathe on it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we really learned in, and even going before 2017, was the smoke comes inside your home.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, the wildfire smoke health messaging had been go inside, close your doors and windows, and you'll be fine. But that's not really very helpful advice, because the smoke
Sure.
comes inside. The particulate matter in smoke is super duper duper tiny. One of the things that kind of a visual is if you take a 1 millimeter grain of sand and cut it up 10,000 times, then you have a particulate, the right size particulate that's in wildfire smoke. It's really small. So it's going to
Yeah.
come inside your house. It comes in anytime you open a door or window, it'll come in through your vents. And eventually your indoor air quality will match your outdoor air quality. But we also know that there's ways to clean your indoor air. And you just have to, do it. But the great news is the technology does exist. So starting really right after I got started and got really interested in wildfire smoke, going to bring my dad back into this. He was telling me that one thing he had always really wanted to do was get air cleaners with HEPA filters in them to people. Because he was like, that's the best thing you can do to help people when the air
Sure.
quality is bad, is give them a way to create cleaner indoor airspace. And, that was really great advice. And I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, that sounds like a lot of work. Like, how do you do that? How do you manage the logistics? How do you even get them? That seemed
Yeah. How do you
really,
fund it? Yeah. All the
yeah,
things.
it just seemed like a lot. And then in 2015, Amy Sillenberg, the executive director of Climate Smart Missoula, came to me and said, "Hey, Sarah, I have a new nonprofit in town, and we have this program called Summer Smart, and we want to work on helping Missoula adapt to climate change and be prepared for it, in addition to trying to combat it, but just acknowledging we live in a wildfire crazy climate now." She asked, like, "Is there something you'd like us to work with you on?" I was like, "Hey, yes."
Let's
So
do it.
I told her, this idea of getting air cleaners to people who need them, but I told her, like, I don't know how to go about this. It's just kind of a pie in the sky thing. And she came back the next year and said, "Hey, Sarah, I have money. I got us a grant. Let's do it." She had gone out and gotten us enough funding to do a pilot project to get portable air cleaners with true HEPA filters in them, to shut in respiratory patients, elderly shut in respiratory patients in Missoula before the 2017 fire season. And the goal was to kind of have this pilot project, get them their air cleaners, and find out if it helped keep them out of the hospital, if they had benefit from it, and then try to use that to leverage expanding the program. And then 2017 happened, and we had to scale that project up really rapidly,
Mhm.
where we ended up getting air cleaners into the City Lake Elementary School and into the Lolo School, Woodman School, the Condon School, and maybe a couple of others, and as well as to clinic patients in Sealy Lake. We were able to send 25 up to the clinic up there and have them triage their patients and get them to those people who needed them most. We got them into the clinic itself because the clinic was smoky, that you could see the smoke inside the clinic, and just trying to really frantically respond to the smoke and get as much funding as we could. Amy just put it on our credit card.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, the health department, we emptied our public health emergency preparedness budget. It's for flu usually, but we
Sure.
spent it all on air cleaners.
Hmm.
There's no funding mechanism for it, so we had to get creative. And Amy and I both applied for grants from the Montana Disaster Relief Foundation that came out of those fires. And we both got them, which is great. So I spent my grant on portable air cleaners for a cache that I now have. And Amy spent some on some of it on air cleaners to give away to people, particularly families with children with health concerns.
Mm.
And she also used it to build an awesome website, which is montanawildfiresmoke.org, which is where I direct people to. We have so many resources up there. Um, so we ended up with these caches of air cleaners, and Amy gives hers away, which is great. The way that we wrote our grant and the way that we've added to our cache, mine are all loaners. So daycares and preschools, and actually I have a school with some right now too, that can check them out and then need to return them after the fire season. That way we can have them on hand to help people in coming years. And we always hope that the folks that borrow them will say, "Oh, this is so great," and then they'll buy their own. And that has
Right.
happened occasionally where they've seen the benefit of having cleaner indoor air and have made that investment for themselves. Um, so I currently have 125 portable air cleaners that I can loan out. Um, And we're really focusing on getting those air cleaners out to children for the most part, facilities that have children in them, uh, because kids are really vulnerable to wildfire smoke. There's
Right.
been just more and more studies show that during a wildfire smoke event, the rate of um, hospital admissions or emergency room admissions for asthma problems goes way up, way more for children than for adults. There's also a really disturbing study that recently came out of California that in a group of uh, infant primates, and their macaques, were exposed to wildfire smoke during some 2017 fires. They were outside in cages, and the researchers just followed these monkeys for 10 years. And this primates, I might have that wrong, what kind of primate they are, but they followed them for like 10 years, and the smoke exposure had kind of stiffened their lungs and altered some immune responses that then got passed off onto their offspring. So while the lungs are developing, they're really vulnerable to wildfire smoke. So we're kind of focusing on helping the younglings as best we can, and by getting my air cleaners out to daycares and preschools. It's a way to get multiple kids with these small amount of money, essentially.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
would,
this still seems kind of like, I don't want to describe it. It's dismissive to sort of describe it as a hustle, but it sounds like between you and Amy and the variety of grants and trying to cobble together a funding mechanism, like it's kind of a band-aid approach. I mean, how should we as a community, as a government, as societies be thinking about this wildfire smoke issue?
well,
And
it
how can we
really
address it more systemically?
exactly needs to be systemic. It needs to have policy and engineering controls behind it. And there is, depending on where you are, some good news on that front. One of the
Okay.
things we ran into when we were learning about indoor air quality and about HVAC systems, like I never expected to be able to speak intelligently about commercial air handling systems, but I have had to learn a lot over the past several
Sure.
years. And one of the things that we learned was that the organization that sets standards for how those air handlers are operated and what kind of filtration they use had never made anything for wildfire smoke. And
Hmm.
so, what we have in Montana and most states, California's the exception here, is the only thing that's required is what's called a MERV 8 filter. And that's a good filter most of the time. Like, it's not a bad filter, but it's not designed for wildfire smoke. It's not designed to collect those very, very tiny particles that are in the smoke. And so it's not going to be as effective cleaning your indoor air as perhaps a more robust filter would be. So we were able to pester enough of the right people in enough places that eventually ASHRAE got word that this is something that they could fix. So ASHRAE, it's the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. They now have a work group developing guidelines for wildfire smoke impacted areas to
Hmm.
kind of have from on high, kind of a national organization saying this is what you should do. And so that's really exciting because when we were learning more and more about filtration and about air handling systems, we were having a lot of schools being built in Missoula, and they would come through the health department for plan review. And we'd say, well, what are your filters? And they'd say, it's a MERV 8. We're like, can you do better? Like, well, ASHRAE only requires a MERV 8. I'm like,
Sure. Yeah.
try better. So we're looking forward to having recommendations and guidelines coming down from a committee that's part of ASHRAE that is going to be much more authoritative
Hmm.
than air quality specialist in Missoula, Montana, who has read some things and thinks you should do something different. So I'm really excited for that. I know some people who are working on it, and they're amazing humans, and that will give us something that is we can point to and say we should follow this, we should adopt this. In California, they actually in 2019 updated their building energy codes to require MERV 13 filters in all new construction, so in residential and commercial construction. And MERV 13 filters are designed to catch those very fine particles. So they're ahead of us on that. But I think that having an ASHRAE come out with these guidelines will give us something that we can point to. Another thing that is happening that we can look forward to is the Missoula's Climate Ready Plan. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but the community has worked for some years on developing this plan for really kind of adapting to climate change, to say, okay,
Right.
where are we at, and where do we need to build resilience? And it was really amazing for me. I am the wildfire smoke nerd. I was just there in the health section, but there were many, many different sectors involved in these workshops. You had, business and agriculture and water people and traffic and emergency response, and just a lot of different sectors present at the workshops working on this. And when each working group was kind of asked to come back and say, what's one of our biggest areas of concern, wildfire smoke came up over and over and over again. It wasn't, when we're talking about climate change, wildfire smoke is seen locally as one of our biggest challenges for our community. So it's not just, me and Amy being the plucky people being upset about wildfire smoke. It's there's a lot more folks across the community and across different sectors who see this as something that we need to do more to address. And so, the final Climate Ready document that came out and got adopted by local government has a lot of great things in there about how we should respond to wildfire smoke and how we should prepare our community for more wildfire smoke. So I think that if we can, really start trying to follow what's in there and pursue it, then that gives us something to stand on. So my goal is to get away from it just being me and Amy throwing things at the wall to see what sticks.
Right.
The more we can have a holistic approach where it's programmatic and it's in policy, I think we're going to be able to get to go farther, because right now, as it is, if people want, protection from wildfire smoke, they either need to, do it themselves, or if they get the sign-up sheet from me and Amy if you're daycare or preschool, we can help you through the wildfire season. But there's nothing programmatic, and that's what where we really need to get to, is just having a plan for the whole area.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, this has been fantastic. This seems like the appropriate time to kind of bring the conversation to a close. But where can, I got to assume most listeners are regular readers of your work. But if not, where can people find you online? Where can people sort of learn more about your work?
Well, I'm going to actually point you to montanawildfiresmoke.org. That is a really great place to learn all about wildfire smoke and how to protect yourself. And there are links there to my blog that you can find it that way. If you really want to just go to the Missoula County website to read long form writing about wildfire smoke, you can go to missoulacounty.us/current AQ. So CURRENT AQ for current air quality. And that has all of this year's wildfire smoke updates on it. But I do always recommend the montanawildfiresmoke.org. It is an easy to navigate website with lots of great information. We have new videos up this year with information about portable air cleaners, how to make your own air cleaner, what to know and think about for your HVAC system. We also have some handouts and printable stuff and infographics. Climate Smart has done really great work at that website, and I'm just super thrilled to be a part of it. And if anybody feels so moved to help out the cause of getting portable air cleaners to people who need them, there is a place to donate on that website for Climate Smart so that they can build their pack cache and pack sensor portable air cleaner and get get those out to people who need them as we pursue cleaner indoor air for everyone.
Fantastic. Tara Coefield, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, with support from the University of Montana College of Business and Consolidated Electrical Distributors. AJ Williams is our producer. Jeff Ament, John Wicks, and VTO made our music, and Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. If you like what you heard, tell your friends about us. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.